nowadays they're opaque and you can't really go into the depths of them. But then you look at the Web3 space and all the blockchains that are completely public and open source and transparent. Maybe if I'm reading it right, it sounds like an opportunity to better educate the next generation of developers in a really grassroots way without needing the permission of any institutions to go into the code bases.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I do think that open source and Web3 seem to go hand in hand ideologically quite nicely, and blockchain technology along with that. Just generally trying to create some equity for access to information and things that people are developing, and a rising tide lifts all boats and all that. And it seems to be a real meritocracy with what Anusha was saying earlier with Stellar, like the cream rises to the top. Only the working pull requests get submitted, and then I think she was saying some of those people who do well and get incentivized end up going to be making their own businesses. So it's not like you're even stuck with Stellar or anything like that. It seems to be, for some people, a stepping stone to something bigger. So it just seems like a great way to get your platform or whatever you're building built out, fully fleshed out, or even a video game, and it's great for the people who want to pitch in. I'm sure there's thanks to the internet, masses of people out there now that want to get involved with this kind of stuff, and now they can.
I definitely see Web 3.0 as kind of providing the missing link for the open source kind of revolution. Today, like, we're running, you just have to trust whatever software you're running. Your iPhone, you don't get to see what's on there, and you just have to trust Apple hasn't put anything bad on there. And it's also inefficient because you've got companies writing the same software to compete with each other. To me, like, I'd love to see the world go to where everything we're running is open source, and there's no duplication of effort. Everyone's contributing to the software. And you're able to see what code's being run, which helps prevent your whatever your software you're using being malicious without you knowing. That's kind of the world I want to see, which is just every single piece of software you're using is open source, and people are just getting paid to make contributions. And that sounds like what Stellar was doing, which is really cool. So.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully it's something we might want to try and recreate with YDRS as we look to kind of seek to go down more of an organized route and try and create incentives for people to pitch in with advocacy efforts or building out the database or various resources on the website. It's inspirational to kind of see that it definitely works for Stellar, at least. I think our setup will be a little bit more voluntary and a little less fiscally rewarding, but being able to kind of contribute to that greater whole is I mean, that's why I got involved making broker guides. I was like, this is something I can cover. I may not know how the markets work or how puts and calls and things like that all come together. I'm just a buyer and holder. Sorry
for interrupting. I was going to say, so you're kind of envisioning like someone could put a bounty and say, I need a broker guide for this obscure broker, and it could incentivize someone to come along and actually create that content for your site.
Exactly, yeah. Or translation for that guide. Like for a lot of guides that I've done before, we had a lot of pretty much all of them got translated into French by one person, like well over 100 guides. He just like smashed through all of them. And we had a handful of German people working on German translation and so on. And then, we've got 10 different translations on a website, not on my DRS yet, but I hope to kind of replicate that. And we're building more efficient ways of getting that done as well. Thanks to other very tech savvy people. I went the long way around it on my first run and made it all a lot more work than it should be. But that's the benefit of getting extra perspectives in, because they're like, hey, you can do this a lot easier, you know. So I'm all for open source for everything.
Definitely.
It just seems socially wasteful that we would have 4 different companies building the same thing, like objectively same thing, but using, quadruple the manpower, or quadruple the state, the resources, versus having a unified and efficient single service that works for everyone.
And yes, that's exactly my frustration with the current world is like, you got people who spent their years building something, and you've got competitors building the exact same thing. And like computers, it just seems like much more natural to have a model where everything is public and people are getting paid to contribute to that public communal resource. It's just we haven't had something like blockchain to make that feasible. And the reality of open source today is actually, like, Linux is open source. There's lots of people who volunteer their time, but then companies use that open source to make money, and that doesn't get back to the contributors either. So there's just like a lot of kind of like injustices, so to speak, in how code is developed nowadays. And I'm really hoping to see that change.
Yeah, it's definitely not perfect or even close. It's really interesting. I mean, there are like people that work full time at IBM just on Linux. And so it's like, well, do you really want to leave the market power of how we fund this development to, almost a chance, because it's all done off of the actual Git contributions. And, personally, community management and the incentives around the collaboration, they are not certainly the easiest thing in the whole world to do. You just heard someone who has spent a lot of time building it out with crypto that was sort of allocated from day one towards community incentives and alignments, which is really common in Web3. But it's also sort of reliant on building an entirely new blockchain network that does all the things you would expect there to be in something like that. And that's, that's not really something that can be done over and over and over again. Eventually you're just issuing some securities at a certain point and raising money for something that, because it's not, to get the money by donation definitely seems, in my view, is like a really solid, sustainable, and acceptable approach for finding those funds. Because, eventually the initial startup of any kind of network will fade out after you have, some of the initial contributions from the Stripes and the IBMs of the world. I remember at Monerads, I set it up where I would do a profit split off of the income with CJ, and I was my best efforts at the time in trying to keep everything efficient and low scale, and this is also why we have applied many times to the community fund and using those resources in alignment with our values, to keep the focus on the product and the system, so that you don't have to focus on maximizing the profits, and instead you can keep it structured for the benefit of the users in a fair, low margin, and transparent system. Does that make sense? Are we all sort of on the same page on the open source part, and also just in general on the need or want for a blockchain transfer agent?
Absolutely.
definitely. I mean, preaching to the choir in these spaces for sure. It's I think anyone coming listening to the these episodes of Taking Stock are the people who desperately want these changes to begin with. But yeah, I think thanks to this online community, we're seeing that maybe this is actually a reality we can make together. I think there's enough smart people around who can contribute to make something bigger. And yeah, I think everyone's just sick of the middlemen. So bring on the open source Web3 revolution.
Yeah, you can say that again, Vivek, with you there.
Yeah, I'm so ready for it. I'm just waiting. I'm so curious as to what's going to be the catalyst to kind of move people over to Web3 or blockchain. I think we need a kind of mass adoption event somehow, but it seems in the meantime there's this kind of nice steady progression of people learning about it and getting on board and wanting to be a part of it.
It needs its killer app. Like, Excel was the killer app on the Mac when it first came out, like 1980s. I don't think people are going to really even understand they're using blockchain when it takes off. They're just going to get something that they couldn't do before. And, I don't know who's going to be the first killer app, but I think that day is coming within the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I'm playing a blockchain-based game on my mobile phone, and it feels like a AAA game. I think it could easily see mass adoption, and people won't even know they're trading NFTs. Hopefully, I think that back end still needs a bit of refinement, but they're doing some amazing stuff in terms of streamlining that stuff.
I've always hoped to see like Pokemon cards be the first NFTs. Like, I know that seems like an obvious direction, but like if something like Pokemon was able to actually join the space, I think it would just catch on like wildfire. The biggest concern is the SEC and how these things are getting categorized as like if they put so much regulation on top of this, where people are having to like file taxes because their 8-year-old is trading cards, that is the biggest kind of threat to this. But at the same time, I'll say that it's decentralized. Even if the United States makes problems, this stuff could take off somewhere else, in another part of the world. So.
Yeah, and that's part of the beauty of it all being online, that we're all still connected through the interwebs, even if things can't be regulated as we want them in each country. It will still be going on somewhere else, and then it will force that mass adoption, because no one wants to be the last on the bus or on the boat.
Yep, and if it takes off in another country, like just pull one out of a hat, like Japan or something like that, that's going to force regulators' hands here as well, because people are going to be like, why can't I play that awesome game? So even that, I think, is not insurmountable, like as far as like government making it difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, I mean, speaking of incentives, that's a pretty good one. But yeah, I think I don't know if anyone listening at the moment has any questions they want to come up and ask. But I think we're coming to the end of our hour. So I was thinking we could wrap up soon, unless John, you had anything else you wanted to add as well.
There's definitely a lot to it. And I think we really have a chance here to be that killer app for stock market infrastructure, open sourcing Wall Street, building a standard system, I will say Bob has started a thread on a blockchain transfer agent, and I wanted to go over some of